Why did the mountain go silent the moment the last vehicle accelerated? It came straight through the main approach in a reckless surge, engine screaming, dust plumbing behind it like a flare. Not a probing move, not disciplined, desperate. Inside the outbuilding, the satellite uplink clock read 10:17, 7 minutes into transmission, 11 minutes left. Tessa didn't think about the arm. She shifted the rifle on the sill and let the wall take the weight her forearm no longer could. The compression wrap had gone darker. She registered it the way you register weather: real, inconvenient, not negotiable. Outside, Donovan's voice was calm, too calm. Vehicle pushing gate. Briggs, fall back 2 meters, hold your line. The mounted weapon on the truck opened up before it cleared the bend. Mud brick exploded along the courtyard wall. Walsh instinctively stepped toward her, then stopped himself. She was already calculating. Distance, 620 meters and closing fast. Wind cross inconsistent. Glass angled. Driver visible through half-shattered windshield. She breathed in for 4. Held for 7. Let it out over 8. The first round spiderwebbed the windshield but didn't stop the engine. She adjusted, not emotionally, mechanically. 2 clicks right, slight elevation correction. The second shot punched through the fractured glass. The vehicle veered hard left, slammed into the compound wall, and stalled in a coughing cloud of smoke. Silence again. Not relief, recalibration. Walsh exhaled slowly beside her. You're bleeding through. I know. Behind them, Victor Drell didn't look up from the laptop. The upload bar inched forward, 43%. Outside the perimeter, the Northwest force hesitated. They had pushed everything they had left into that last charge. It had failed. Donovan's voice came across the radio. All elements hold. They're breaking contact. Tessa watched through the scope as the remaining figures pulled back into rock cover. Controlled withdrawal, not rooted. They would report up. They would reassess. But they were finished here. Inside the room, the only sound was the faint electronic hum of data leaving the ground for somewhere that could not be reached by men with rifles. 58%. Briggs leaned against the wall, chest rising hard. He looked at Tessa, then at the tags resting against her collarbone. He didn't ask. That was new. Walsh finally stepped closer. Sit down before you fall down. I'm fine. That wasn't a suggestion. There was no argument in his tone, just quiet insistence. She lowered herself onto an equipment crate without protest. Pain had begun to bloom outward, no longer sharp but deep and insistent. Her body was reminding her it existed. Drell spoke without turning. Your father once told me that the most dangerous moment in any operation is the one after you think you've survived it. Tessa met Donovan's eyes across the room. 71%. Donovan nodded once. Perimeter stays tight until we're wheels up. You think he'll try something stateside? Hatcher asked quietly. He already is, Tessa said. The room absorbed that. Because Colonel Warren Hargrove was not a man who waited for proof. He erased problems. 84%. The minutes stretched. And for the first time since the first shot hours ago, anxiety crept in. Not about the enemy outside the walls, but about the unseen architecture beyond the sky. If Hargrove realized what was in that transmission before it finished, would the satellite feed cut? Would Langley intercept? Would this entire night collapse into a classified footnote? 92%. She closed her eyes briefly, not to rest, to steady. Ignored. That was the word she had lived with since she first filed her application for reassignment 14 months ago. Qualified, decorated, quietly sidelined. Too small. Too quiet. Too inconvenient. 98%. The progress bar froze. Every person in the room went still. Drell's fingers hovered above the keyboard. Walsh stopped breathing. Donovan didn't blink. 3 seconds. 4. The bar moved again. Upload complete. No one cheered. There are moments in life when triumph is too heavy for celebration. Drell leaned back slowly. It's done. The relief in the room was not loud. It was structural, like a building deciding not to fall. But Tessa felt something else. Not joy. Not closure. Just the beginning of consequence. Donovan checked his watch. We move in 3, exfil South Ravine. She stood. The arm protested. She ignored it. Because the mission wasn't finished until everyone was off the mountain. And mountains don't care about justice. They only care whether you're steady. What does it feel like when the thing you've carried for 17 years finally leaves your hands? The exfiltration route cut through shale and narrow defiles where sound traveled unpredictably. The team moved in disciplined silence. Dawn had fully broken, painting the ridge in pale gold that made everything look almost gentle. Almost. Tessa moved forth in line now, not because she had to, because Donovan had shifted positions without comment. Protection without announcement. Her arm was stiffening. The bandage held, but each step sent a reminder through her body that blood had been lost. Walsh noticed, of course he did. You're lightheaded, he murmured at the second rest halt. I'm functional. That wasn't the question. She looked at him. He held her gaze. Determined. That was what she felt now, not anger, not vengeance. Determined to see this through the right way. Donovan crouched beside her during the break. Langley's going to fracture over this. Yes. You ready for that? I've been ready for 17 years. He studied her for a long moment. You could have taken him out. She knew who he meant. Hargrove. A single name, a single rifle, a single solution. Yes, she said. And you didn't. No. He nodded once. Because that mattered. They moved again. By the time the extraction bird cut across the southern valley, the northwest force was gone. No pursuit, no final ambush. Just distance. The Chinook's rotor wash swallowed the ridge in dust. Briggs offered her a hand at the ramp. She hesitated, then took it. Not because she needed help climbing. Because sometimes strength isn't refusing support. Inside the aircraft, as the ground fell away, she finally allowed herself one private breath. Broken. That was the emotion she had never admitted. Her father had died under a fabricated report. His name had been archived with quiet honors and no investigation. She had spent years rebuilding him in fragments, financial records, deployment orders, anomalous routing codes. Now the truth was no longer hers alone. It belonged to the world. The helicopter banked south. Donovan leaned close enough that only she could hear. When this hits, it won't be clean. I know. He'll deny, he'll counteraccuse, he'll call you compromised. She met his eyes. I know. But you won't be alone. That landed somewhere she hadn't expected. Not alone. Hope, she realized, is not loud. It's a shift in weight. The aircraft carried them out of the valley. Behind them, the compound grew smaller. Ahead, consequences waited. And for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying them by herself. Why do some men fear silence more than gunfire? 3 weeks later, Langley did not explode. It imploded. Committees convened. Internal reviews opened. Names that had never been spoken aloud were suddenly on official agendas. Colonel Warren Hargrove appeared before an oversight panel with the same measured cadence he had used in every briefing for 4 decades. But the evidence was digital now. Immutable. bank transfers, encrypted communications, authorization deviations. Victor Drell testified under protection. Donovan submitted his report without deviation. Walsh included a single line in his medical log: unidentified contractor, code red. He never amended it. When they called Tessa to testify, she wore civilian clothes and her father's dog tags beneath them. The hearing room was cold. Cameras present. Questions precise. Did you knowingly position yourself on an operational team under incomplete disclosure? Yes. Did you withhold your call sign to prevent detection? Yes. Did you intend harm against Colonel Hargrove? She paused. No. Truth has a different weight when spoken without anger. Weeks turned into months. Hargrove resigned pending investigation. Charges followed. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just documented. Accountable. One evening, long after the headlines had moved on, Tessa stood in a quiet Montana field at dusk. The air was cold. The grass familiar. She carried no rifle. Only the tags in her hand. I didn't miss, she said softly. The wind answered in 3 different truths at once. She smiled. Not wide. Not triumphant. Just steady. Because sometimes redemption isn't loud. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why was she watching the East Ridge instead of the target? 48 hours earlier, the forward operating base looked like something assembled out of obligation rather than confidence. 4 prefab structures bolted into rock. A comms mast leaning slightly west like it had already given up arguing with the wind. Someone had written "Welcome to Paradise" on a plywood board with a black marker that had run dry halfway through the word. At 8,000 feet, the air had a thin edge to it. Every breath felt borrowed. Alpha Team had been in country 6 days when the Chinook came in with resupply. Ammunition, batteries, water bladders. And her. Tessa Grant stepped off the ramp with a medical bag slung over one shoulder and a pack on the other. 5'4", compact, unremarkable at first glance. Until you watched her move. Cole Briggs did. He leaned against the ops building, arms crossed, reading her like an unscheduled complication. We got a field medic, he muttered. Great, who's next? The cook. She didn't look at him. Didn't slow. Didn't speed up. She walked past as if his voice had been wind over rock. Inside the operations hut, Senior Chief Ray Donovan stood over the map table with Chief Doyle Hatcher. They both looked up when she entered. Tessa Grant, she said evenly. CIA intelligence liaison, target confirmation. Donovan's eyes were steady, measured. He had the look of a man who had learned that most problems introduce themselves quietly. We've been briefed. Not welcome. Not unwelcome. Just assessed. She stepped closer to the map. Her gaze moved over the compound photograph projected on the screen. Mud walls, north outbuilding, southern approach. And then, just 3 seconds, her eyes shifted east. To the ridge line. High ground. Observation angle. Not the target. Donovan noticed. Analysts look at buildings. Operators look at terrain. He filed it away. The briefing replayed in his head. Victor Drell, former asset, suspected compromise, preparing to sell sensitive operational intelligence. Neutralize. Recover. Clean exit. Authorization, Sierra 7 actual. Signed by Colonel Warren Hargrove. Everything tidy. Too tidy. Briggs had asked the obvious question during the digital brief. Why does Langley need boots to confirm their own asset? Hargrove's answer had been smooth. Miss Grant will verify biometric confirmation, non-negotiable. Now she stood 3 feet from Donovan, eyes still on the east ridge. "You've studied the site?" he asked. "For 11 months. He didn't ask why 11. He didn't need to. Anxiety hummed beneath the surface of the room, not loud but present. A new variable, an outsider in a unit that trusted experience over paperwork. "Movement at 2200, Donovan said. "We travel light." "Yes, Senior Chief." Her voice held no need to prove anything. That unsettled Briggs more than arrogance would have. But the hour before stepping off is the most honest hour of any mission. Men check gear twice, then a third time. Not because they forgot. Because fear looks like diligence when you don't name it. Tessa moved through the staging area quietly, inventorying her medical kit. Tourniquets, gauze, IV sets, chest seals. Her hands were economical. No wasted motion. She paused near Specialist Conrad Aldridge. He sat on an equipment case, drinking water in steady gulps, broad shoulders, confident posture. Too confident. She watched his skin tone. The flush at the neck. The faint delay in his movements. "Sir," she said calmly, "may I check something?" He blinked at her, surprised. "I'm good, Doc." "I know." She took his wrist anyway. Pulse elevated. Slight tremor. Exertional heat stress, early stage. Not dramatic. Yet. Within minutes she had him seated in shade, cooling fluids in, gear loosened. Donovan observed from across the yard. She spoke to Aldridge the entire time in a low, steady cadence. Not alarmed. Not patronizing. Precise. By the end of it, his breathing had normalized. He looked at her differently now. Respect replacing dismissal. "How bad?" Donovan asked when she finished. "By kilometer 4, she replied, "potentially severe." He nodded slowly. "Good catch." Behind her, Hatcher noticed something else. As she leaned forward, adjusting the IV line, her hand had briefly settled on the grip of Aldridge's sidearm. Not consciously. Muscle memory. Her fingers had fit the angle perfectly. Then withdrawn. Filed away. But they moved at 2200. 11 kilometers. Mountain terrain that didn't forgive carelessness. Night vision turned the world flat and green. Depth became suggestion instead of certainty. Tessa walked third in column. Hatcher behind her. He watched her foot placement. Exact. She stepped into the prints of the man ahead without looking down. Counter-tracking technique. Unconscious. At the 3-kilometer mark, they halted. She sat facing north, scanning darkness. Hatcher lowered himself beside her. "First time in country?" he asked. "No." The answer was simple. He studied her profile in the green glow. "You move like you've done this before." "My father taught me to walk carefully." Not defensive. Just fact. Something in her tone carried weight. Determined. That was the undercurrent in her. Not ambition, not recklessness. Purpose. They moved again. 6 kilometers to go. The compound appeared at 340. Low mud walls in a shallow depression. North outbuilding faintly lit. A laptop glow. "Count," Donovan whispered. 8 minimum, Hatcher replied. "Target in the north structure," Tessa said quietly. Donovan glanced at her. "How do you know?" "Antenna orientation, light pattern, that's where transmission equipment would be staged." He held her gaze for a moment. He wasn't evaluating her answer. He was evaluating her certainty. "Miss Grant," he said finally, "Eastern Ridge Overwatch." Briggs exhaled sharply. "You're putting the doc on a sniper perch." "I'm putting the person with the best eyes where they're needed." That settled it. She didn't argue, didn't smile. She simply moved. On the eastern ridge, she unpacked carefully. Medical kit first. Always. Underneath it, another compartment. Foam cut. Measured. She assembled the Remington 700 in the dark without looking. Each piece sliding into place with familiarity born from repetition. The scope's elevation turret bore a small diagonal strip of blue tape. Her thumb found it instantly. Muscle memory in the dark. Her father's phrase. She lay prone, breathing steady. No wasted thought. The first shot of the night did not come from the compound. It came from the northeast ridge. Stokes went down hard. Ambush. The gates below burst open. Vehicles ignited. Chaos reorganizing itself. She adjusted her position without panic. 870 meters. Downhill angle. Wind left 11 inches. The first round missed by 8. Information. Not failure. She corrected. Second round struck. Vehicle crashed into drainage ditch. Silence. On the radio, Walsh's voice. What was that? Hatcher's reply, Eastern Ridge. Donovan's voice followed, controlled but changed. Miss Grant, report. Target vehicle disabled, she said. Western approach clear, move now. No tremor. No pride. Just clarity. Inside the compound, Victor Drell did not yet know who had just altered his survival odds. On the ridge, Tessa reset her breathing. Ignored. That emotion flickered through her briefly. Ignored by committees. Ignored by men who had skimmed her file and filed her under analyst. Tonight she wasn't asking to be seen. She was ensuring they survived. Below, Donovan and Hatcher breached the north outbuilding. They found Drell exactly where she said he would be. When Donovan later asked him how he knew she would come, Drell's answer was simple. Her father said she would. On the ridge, Tessa didn't hear that. She only watched the northwest horizon, where new movement had begun. 4 figures. Professional spacing. Closing. The real test hadn't started yet. And the mountain was about to decide who was steady. How do you tell the difference between an ambush and a message? The 4 figures approaching from the northwest didn't move like insurgents. Their spacing was too disciplined, their pace too controlled. No wasted motion, no erratic scans. Professional. Tessa lay prone on the eastern ridge, scope steady, wind brushing cold against her cheek. The sky was beginning to pale at the edges, dawn coming in thin layers. Below, Donovan's voice came low over comms. Movement confirmed, 4 northwest, 2.4 clicks. Hatcher answered, not local fighters. No, Donovan said quietly, they're not. Tessa didn't speak. She adjusted magnification. The lead figure paused, scanned, signaled with 2 fingers. Military. But not U.S. Her pulse didn't rise. It narrowed. Inside the north outbuilding, Victor Drell sat at a folding table with his laptop open, 3 external drives connected, cables coiled like quiet snakes. He looked toward the door when Donovan entered. Where is the woman? Drell asked. On the ridge, Donovan replied. Drell nodded once, as if something expected had just been confirmed. Her father said she would come. Donovan didn't react. Not outwardly. But something settled deeper behind his eyes. On the ridge, Tessa tracked the lead mover. Wind had shifted again, subtle, irregular, pre-dawn thermal changes along the slopes. Her father's voice echoed in memory. The wind doesn't lie, it just tells 3 truths at once. She read all 3. At 1,150 meters, the northwest force split. Standard maneuver, 1 element to probe direct, one flanking south to stretch perimeter. "Walsh," Donovan said over comms, "south quadrant, you'll have company." "Copy." The lead element entered a natural rock channel, exactly where she had predicted they would 2 days ago when her eyes paused on the map's eastern ridge. Patience is not passive. It's deliberate. She waited. Breath in 4. Hold 7. Out 8. The shot broke clean. The lead figure dropped mid-stride. The remaining 3 scattered, disciplined even in reaction. Below, Walsh and Aldridge opened controlled fire on the southern flank. 30 seconds of suspended geometry. Then, impact. Not loud. Not cinematic. A blunt force slammed into her left forearm high and fast. The world didn't slow. It compressed. Pressure. Heat. Pain. She didn't gasp. Didn't roll. Didn't curse. She shifted the rifle onto stone support, removing her left arm from the equation entirely. Through and through, she assessed clinically, bone likely intact, bleeding heavy but manageable. Another muzzle flash northeast. Counter-sniper. He had waited for her flash. Professional. She rotated her torso slightly, reducing silhouette. Wind reading recalculated. 940 meters. Breath. Fire. The opposing flash went dark. She stayed prone. Because that was the difference between surviving and reacting. Blood ran down her sleeve. She pulled her medical kit with her right hand, pinned her injured wrist under her knee to stabilize it, applied hemostatic gauze one-handed. Functional. Not elegant. She breathed through it. 4 in. 7 hold. 8 out. Again. Below, Donovan's voice cut in. Cole report. Left forearm through and through, counter-sniper down, northwest halted. A pause. How bad? He asked. Manageable. There was no bravado in her tone. Just truth. Inside the compound, Drell watched the perimeter monitors Donovan had set up. They weren't here for me, Drell said quietly. They were here for whoever came. Donovan glanced at him, meaning. Hargrove does not leave loose ends. The name sat heavy. On the ridge, Tessa felt the first wave of real pain bloom outward. Her body had accepted the damage. Now it wanted acknowledgement. Ignored. That was the familiar internal word again. Ignored by supervisor when she first requested deeper access. Ignored when she warned about inconsistencies in routing codes. Ignored when she applied for this assignment under the guise of biometric confirmation. She hadn't pushed. She had repositioned. 14 months of positioning. And now she was here, bleeding into Afghan stone, protecting a transmission that could fracture Langley. Below, Donovan moved fast. He and Hatcher breached the outer wall of the Northwest Element's advance path, forcing the remaining movers to withdraw to cover. Walsh reported southern flank stabilized. Aldridge steady. The mountain grew quiet again. But it was the quiet of recalculation. Dawn spread slowly, pink edging the eastern horizon. Tessa checked her wrap. Compression holding. Hand grip reduced but functional. She scanned again. Because professionals wait for second attempts. Inside the outbuilding, Donovan laid it out. The satellite window opens in 4 hours and 53 minutes, he said. Drell nodded. It will take 8 minutes. And they'll try again before then, Hatcher added. Yes, Tessa said calmly, entering the room. Blood marked her sleeve, but her expression was unchanged. Walsh immediately moved toward her. Sit. She sat without argument. He cut the sleeve cleanly. Entry lateral, exit medial, upward trajectory. Bones intact, he muttered. Of course it is, she replied softly. He irrigated, packed fresh gauze wrapped tight. Professional hands. Professional silence. Then he pulled the laminated medevac card from his chest pocket. Name, rate, unit, injury classification. He paused, call sign. She said nothing. He looked up. Ma'am, call sign. The silence this time was deliberate. Donovan stepped closer. Her dog tags had slipped free during the descent from the ridge. They hung visible. He read them. Sergeant A. Trant, USMC 317. His jaw tightened slightly. I know those tags, he said quietly. Walsh looked between them. Chief. Donovan made the decision in one breath. Log her as unidentified contractor. Code red. I'll sign the deviation. Walsh held his eyes for 2 seconds. Trust calculation. Then he nodded and wrote it. He didn't ask further. After he finished wrapping the arm, he leaned closer. You've got about 6 hours of stable function before this becomes surgical. Can you work? Yes. Not pride. Not defiance. Just fact. Donovan crouched beside her once Walsh moved away. If your call sign hits Langley's monitoring system. Hargrove gets alerted, she finished. He studied her face. You've been tracking this for years. 14 months officially. And before that, 17. That hung between them. Her father's last mission. Authorized by the same man who had signed this one. Donovan didn't ask the rest. He didn't need to. Outside at 7:48, the Northwest Force tried again. 3 vehicles this time. Heavier fire. 1 pushing north. 1 flanking south. 1 direct toward the main gate. Tessa returned to the ridge despite Walsh's glare. Pain was sharper now, but the geometry was clearer in daylight. 940 meters. Lead vehicle first shot clean. Second vehicle, bearing south toward Walsh and Aldridge. She adjusted, arm screaming. Breath. Fire. Engine block hit. Vehicle stalled. Walsh glanced up instinctively toward her unseen position. He didn't smile. He just nodded once to himself. Respect had replaced doubt completely now. The third vehicle broke off. The Northwest Force retreated to 800 meters. Holding pattern. Waiting. Inside the outbuilding, Drell finalized encryption sequences. The window opens at 10:14, he said. Donovan checked his watch. 2 hours and 20 minutes. Plenty of time for things to go wrong. Tessa returned inside to conserve blood and strength. She stood by the north window, rifle braced against frame. Walsh stepped beside her quietly. Who taught you to self-pack a wound one-handed? He asked. My father. He nodded slowly. Good teacher. Yes. There was a flicker there, brief, contained. Broken. That was the emotion under everything now. Not rage. Broken trust in institutions she had once believed in without question. But broken does not mean useless. Sometimes broken sharpens. At 10:14, the satellite window opened. Upload initiated. 8 minutes. At 10:17, the final assault came. 1 vehicle. Full throttle. All or nothing. The mounted weapon fired blind suppression at the gate. Briggs held position. Donovan steady behind cover. Tessa inhaled slowly. Distance 600 meters. Crossing shot. Driver partially visible through cracked glass. Her arm trembled once. She stilled it. Breath. Fire. The vehicle swerved violently, clipped the wall, died short of the gate. Silence again. Upload bar reached 100%. Transmission complete. No cheers, no dramatic release, just structural relief. Something that had been hidden for 9 years was now somewhere it couldn't be erased. Tessa lowered the rifle. Her left arm throbbed deeply now. The mission wasn't over, but the weight had shifted. And for the first time since she'd read her father's handwriting in that notebook, she allowed herself a single thought that felt almost like hope. Not vengeance, not triumph. Hope that truth, once transmitted, is harder to kill than a man on a ridge. Outside, the mountain stood indifferent. Inside, dignity held the line. And the night that had begun with suspicion was ending with exposure. Some battles are fought with bullets. Others are fought with evidence. She had carried both. What happens after the truth goes live, and no one claps? The compound was quiet in a way that didn't feel victorious. It felt exposed. Victor Drell closed the laptop slowly, as if shutting it too fast might somehow pull the data back from orbit. 8 minutes of transmission, 9 years of buried reports, one name threaded through all of it. Colonel Warren Hargrove. No cheers followed, no handshakes, just breathing. Tessa remained by the north window, rifle lowered but not slung. Her left arm trembled beneath the fresh wrap. Pain had stopped asking permission. It simply existed now, dull, persistent, undeniable. Donovan checked his watch again. 10:23. Satellite window closed, he said quietly. We're dark. Dark meant vulnerable. Because if the upload had reached where Drell said it would reach, someone else now knew. And that someone would not hesitate. Briggs moved to the doorway, scanning the horizon through binoculars. Northwest element pulled back to tree line. No movement for 5 minutes. Too quiet, Walsh muttered. It wasn't fear in his voice. It was experience. Inside, Drell stood slowly from the table. His composure had cracked just enough to show exhaustion beneath it. They'll deny it, he said. Of course they will, Hatcher replied. But they can't erase it anymore. Tessa finally turned from the window. They won't try to erase it, she said softly. They'll try to contain it. Donovan's eyes shifted to her. Meaning. Meaning were the containment. The room understood that immediately. If headquarters had received the transmission, and if Hargrove's internal network had detected the breach, then the narrative would pivot fast. Rogue asset. Compromised team. Unauthorized force. She had seen it before in smaller cases. Blame moves quicker than facts. Outside, a distant thud echoed across the valley. Not gunfire. Rotors. Briggs lowered the binoculars slowly. Aircraft low. Walsh stepped outside for visual confirmation. 2 dots on the southern horizon. Vast. Not transport. Gunships. Donovan felt the shift in his chest. Not panic, not yet, but the tightening that comes when you realize the problem isn't tactical anymore. It's political. Tessa closed her eyes for half a second. Ignored. That word again. Ignored when she'd warned Donovan during planning that external overwatch had been rerouted strangely in the last month. Ignored when she'd requested independent comms verification. Not dismissed cruelly. Just set aside. Now it was coming back in the shape of rotor blades. Walsh re-entered. They're not ours. How close? Donovan asked. 7 minutes. 7 minutes in open terrain, with no anti-air capability. Drell looked at Tessa. I told you he would move quickly. She didn't answer. Because anger would have been easy. And this wasn't about anger anymore. It was about survival. Donovan made the call. We moved to hard cover, North Irrigation Trench, low profile. They moved fast but controlled. No sprinting, no shouting, just trained economy. Tessa stayed near the rear this time. not because she was ordered to. Because rear security matters when extraction isn't guaranteed. Her arm throbbed with every step downhill. Anxious. That was the emotion now, not for herself. For the team. They hadn't signed up for internal corruption. They'd signed up for a mission with a clear objective. Now they were standing in the blast radius of something institutional. They reached the trench, a shallow but reinforced irrigation cut that offered partial cover from air strafing. Donovan crouched beside her. "Tell me what I need to know," he said quietly. She met his eyes fully. "Hargrove authorized my father's last deployment." He waited. It was a black operation, off books. Drell flagged anomalies in the intel stream. My father did too. And the extraction never came. No dramatics in her voice. Just absence. Broken. That was the word beneath her calm, not shattered, not unstable. Broken in the way, a bone heals stronger but never forgets the fracture line. "You think Hargrove left him," Donovan said carefully. "I think he chose the version of the mission that protected his promotion." Silence sat heavy between them. Rotor noise grew louder. Briggs whispered, "2 birds, light attack configuration." Hatcher peered upward. "If they're not ours, whose?" Donovan answered without looking up, "Contracted." Meaning plausible deniability. The first gunship crested the southern ridge at 200 feet, banking hard. The team pressed lower. No insignia visible. No IFF response on Donovan's receiver. The gunship circled once. Assessing. Then, it didn't fire. It hovered. Second bird held back, wider arc. This wasn't immediate elimination. It was intimidation. Tessa exhaled slowly. Containment. A show of force. A message, "We see you." The first gunship dipped slightly lower, rotors chopping dust into spirals. Then a voice crackled over Donovan's secured frequency. "Alpha Team, this is Sierra Command. Stand down, await instructions." Sierra Command. Hargrove's designation. Donovan didn't respond immediately. Walsh looked at him. "Sir." The voice repeated, calmer now. "Stand down. You have exceeded mission scope." Exceeded mission scope. That was the narrative forming. Donovan keyed the mic. "This is Alpha 1. Transmission complete per authorization." A pause. Then authorization rescinded. There it was. Not denial of the data. Not questioning the upload. Rescinded. As if truth had an expiration clause. Tessa watched Donovan carefully. This was his fracture line. Follow command. Or follow conscience. He inhaled once. "Negative," he said evenly. "Mission objective achieved. We are requesting immediate extraction." Silence. Then the gunship dipped lower again. The second bird repositioned behind the ridge. Pressure without fire. A tactic designed to force compliance without witnesses. Hatcher muttered under his breath, "They won't shoot unless we make them." Walsh answered quietly, "Or unless someone orders them to." Tessa's mind worked through angles. Fuel load. Loiter time. Terrain advantage. She shifted slightly, adjusting her rifle despite the pain. "You can't shoot them," Briggs whispered sharply. "I'm not planning to," she replied. She wasn't looking at the gunship. She was looking at the ridge behind it. Thermals distort at low altitude. But not at that angle. If someone on the ridge held a designator. Her breath slowed. There. A faint glint. Not rotor. Not sun. Glass. Someone else was watching. The gunships weren't just intimidation. They were distraction. She leaned toward Donovan. Ridge behind second bird. Laser designation probable. His eyes flicked upward. He trusted her now. Fully. Walsh, he murmured, mark that ridge. Walsh adjusted optics. Confirmed one prone, possible spotter. The equation shifted instantly. This wasn't containment. It was staged escalation. If they fired first, Alpha Team would be the aggressors. If they waited, the designator might justify missile release. Donovan keyed the mic again. Sierra Command, you are in violation of airspace protocol. Identify your authority. No response. The designator glint intensified. Tessa exhaled slowly. Her arm trembled. Determined. That was the final emotion pushing through pain now. Not for revenge. Not for vindication. For the men beside her who had chosen to trust her. She adjusted elevation. 490 meters to the ridge. Wind minimal. Pain irrelevant. Breath. Hold. Fire. The spotter's silhouette jerked once and disappeared behind rock. The laser vanished instantly. The gunchips shifted position sharply. Confusion. Donovan seized the moment. Alpha Team disengaging north, move. They moved fast along the trench line, using the ridge shadow for cover. The gunships climbed altitude rather than pursue. Because without a designated strike point, firing now would expose intent. And intent was still something Hargrove needed deniable. They reached a narrow ravine 2 kilometers north. Natural cover. Temporary safety. Breathing came heavy now. Not from fear. From accumulation. Walsh glanced at Tessa's arm. You're bleeding through again. I know. He tightened the wrap without comment. No one spoke for a full minute. Then Briggs said quietly, so what now? Donovan looked at Tessa. Not because she outranked him. Because she understood the battlefield beyond terrain. Now, she said softly, we wait. For what? Hatcher asked. For the part where truth becomes inconvenient. She leaned back against the ravine wall. Exhaustion crept in at the edges. Hope flickered there too, fragile but real. The upload couldn't be undone. The gunships hadn't fired. Hargrove had blinked. Just once. And sometimes that's enough to change the shape of a war no one admits is happening. Above them, the mountain held its silence. It did not care about rank. It did not care about politics. It only responded to gravity. And gravity, eventually, pulls everything into the open. Why do the most dangerous orders sound calm? The ravine gave them shade, not safety. Alpha Team settled into defensive positions without needing instruction. Years of training shaped the silence. No one wasted breath on speculation. No one asked if headquarters would send help. They all knew the answer to that question already. Tessa sat against the stone wall, her injured arm resting across her lap. The bleeding had slowed again, but her skin had taken on that pale undertone medics recognize immediately. Walsh crouched in front of her. You're losing too much, he said quietly. I'm stable. For now. She held his gaze, not stubborn, just aware. Pain radiated through her forearm in steady pulses. Each one carried memory with it. Her father's handwriting in the margins of a field notebook. Coordinates circled twice. A name underlined once. Hargrove. She blinked the memory away. Stay present. Donovan's radio crackled. Not the same channel as before. Encrypted differently. He frowned. Alpha 1, the voice said, smooth and unhurried. This is Sierra Actual. Not Sierra Command. Sierra Actual. Hargrove himself. Even through static, authority traveled intact. Donovan didn't look at anyone as he replied, "Go." "I'm told there was a complication." The word almost sounded sympathetic. "Almost." "Mission complete," Donovan said. "Transmission confirmed." A pause. "Yes," Hargrove replied. "We're reviewing that anomaly now." Anomaly. That's what 9 years of concealed misconduct became when spoken calmly. Behind Donovan, Briggs muttered under his breath but said nothing aloud. Hargrove continued, "Stand down and hold position. Extraction en route." Walsh met Donovan's eyes. Extraction hadn't been mentioned before. Too fast. Too convenient. Tessa spoke quietly but clearly enough for Donovan to hear. "Ask him the LZ." Donovan nodded slightly. "Confirm landing zone." Another pause. Then, Grid 42, Sierra November 118 443. 15 minutes. Tessa's eyes narrowed slightly. Wrong grid format. Deliberate. Subtle. But wrong. She shook her head once. Donovan didn't miss it. "Negative," he said calmly into the mic. "That grid's outdated." Silence stretched longer this time. Then Hargrove adjusted smoothly. "My mistake. Grid correction to follow." It was flawless on the surface. But mistakes like that don't happen at that level. Not from him. The radio went quiet. Walsh exhaled slowly. "He testing us." "He's confirming control," Donovan replied. Tessa leaned her head back against stone. Anxious. Not about survival now. About narrative. If Hargrove could paint them as rogue before oversight bodies reviewed the upload, the truth would drown in procedure. "Sir," Briggs said carefully, "if we board whatever bird he sends." Donovan finished the thought. "We disappear." No one argued. The ravine felt smaller suddenly. Tessa pushed herself upright despite Walsh's warning look. "We can't stay static," she said. "You're in no condition to move far," Walsh replied. She met his eyes. "I don't need far." Donovan stepped closer. "What are you thinking?" She inhaled once. "There's a secondary relay tower 2 kilometers northeast, abandoned telecom station. We passed its signal trace on insertion." Hatcher frowned. "That rusted skeleton on the ridge." "Yes. And if the upload triggered internal alerts, oversight committees will try to ping for verification. They'll attempt secondary confirmation." Walsh understood first. "You want to boost the signal." "I want to make sure it's undeniable." Donovan studied her. "You can barely hold the rifle." "I don't need the rifle." He held her gaze a long moment. Determined. That word had become her spine. "Walsh," Donovan said finally, "stabilize her enough to move. We shift in 3. Walsh hesitated only half a second before complying. Pain flared hot as he reinforced the wrap and administered a measured dose of field analgesic. "Won't take it all away," he warned. "I don't want it gone," she said softly. Pain kept her focused. They moved carefully along the ravine wall, using terrain to mask aerial observation. The gunships were gone for now. 2 kilometers felt longer uphill. Her breathing grew shallow by the final ascent. But she didn't stop. Ignored. That old wound again. How many times had her reports been dismissed before someone finally read them carefully? Not today. The telecom tower loomed above them, skeletal and rusted, but the base shelter remained partially intact. Hatcher pried the door open with quiet force. Inside, dust, broken panels, outdated equipment. But the structural antenna still stood. Tessa knelt at the main junction box. Her fingers moved slower now. Less precise. Walsh hovered close, ready if she faltered. Drell crouched opposite her. "You're certain this will amplify?" he asked. It won't amplify, she corrected. It will echo. He nodded. She patched a portable transmitter into the old relay line, rerouting through their remaining encrypted handset. Donovan kept watch outside. Briggs scanned the southern valley. Minutes ticked. At 11:02, the handset vibrated once. Incoming secure handshake. Oversight verification request. There it was. Tessa connected. Drell initiated file fragment replay. Condensed. Irrefutable. She watched the progress bar inch forward. Each percent felt heavier than the last. Because now it wasn't just about exposure. It was about survival beyond exposure. Her vision blurred briefly. Walsh steadied her shoulder. "You're fatting," he murmured. "Not yet." Upload complete. The handset pinged confirmation. Oversight received. Time-stamped. Logged. Duplicated. Drell exhaled deeply for the first time all morning. "They can't bury it now," he whispered. Outside, rotor noise returned. Closer this time. Donovan stepped into the doorway. Two birds inbound, not attack profile. Different formation. Different altitude. Briggs scanned, U.S. markings. Legitimate this time. Or at least official. They didn't fire. They circled once, then one peeled off and descended slowly into a clearing 400 meters west. No aggressive posture. No intimidation. Just presence. Donovan looked back at Tessa. "This one's real." She nodded faintly. Her body finally began collecting its debt. Broken. Not defeated. Just worn thin. Walsh helped her to her feet. They moved toward the clearing as the helicopter settled into dust and wind. Two figures stepped out. One in combat uniform. One in a dark windbreaker with a congressional seal patch. Oversight had moved fast. Faster than Hargrove expected. The man in the windbreaker approached Donovan first. "Senior Chief, we received your transmission." Donovan nodded once, and we're very interested." Behind them, the second helicopter remained airborne. Watching. Because even now, Hargrove would be calculating. Tessa swayed slightly. Walsh caught her. The oversight official stepped closer, eyes landing on her wrapped arm. "You're Sergeant A. Trant," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer immediately. Ignored. For years. But not now. "Yes," she said finally. The official nodded once. "Your father's file was incomplete." "I know." He held her gaze a second longer. "Not anymore. That didn't heal anything. It didn't resurrect anything. But it shifted something internal. Hope. Small. Fragile. Real." As Walsh guided her toward the helicopter, rotor wash whipping dust around them, she looked back once at the ridge. The place where she had been shot. The place where she had chosen not to fall. This hadn't been about revenge. It hadn't even been about exposure. It had been about refusing to let silence rewrite memory. Sometimes institutions fracture. Sometimes leadership fails. But dignity, real dignity, doesn't wait for permission. It holds steady on the ridge. Even when wounded. Even when ignored. And when the moment comes, it speaks in actions no one can erase. What does survival feel like when the noise finally stops? The hospital room was quiet in a way the mountains never were. No rotor blades. No encrypted radios. No distant gunfire disguised as wind. Just the steady rhythm of a cardiac monitor and the faint hum of filtered air. Tessa stared at the ceiling tiles as if they might rearrange into something meaningful. Her arm was immobilized now, surgical repair, clean closure, controlled environment. The through-and-through had nicked more muscle than she'd allowed herself to admit. Recovery would take months. Walsh had been right. Pain eventually collects. The door opened softly. Senior Chief Donovan stepped inside, uniform pressed, posture unchanged. But his eyes carried something different. Not command. Respect. He pulled a chair beside her bed and sat without speaking. For a while, neither of them did. Hospitals have a way of forcing honesty. There's nowhere tactical to stand, nowhere to scan, just stillness. "You saved my team," he said finally. She kept her eyes on the ceiling. "We saved each other." He accepted that. Outside the room, investigations were moving fast. Oversight committees, inspector general reviews, closed-door hearings with very careful language. Colonel Warren Hargrove had been placed on administrative leave pending inquiry. Administrative leave. The phrase felt bloodless. But it was a crack. And cracks spread. "They pulled his clearance," Donovan added quietly, "temporarily." Temporarily. Institutions move carefully when one of their own stands accused. She turned her head toward him for the first time. "And my father." Donovan didn't look away. "His mission file has been reopened. Extraction logs reclassified. They're reviewing the chain of authorization." That wasn't an apology. But it was movement. And movement matters. Ignored. That word had shaped so much of her life. Ignored warnings, ignored anomalies, ignored grief dressed up as procedure. Not anymore. Donovan leaned back slightly. "There's something else," he said. She waited. "They offered you a commendation." A small, almost invisible smile touched her mouth. "I don't want one." "I figured." He paused. "They also offered reinstatement." That made her look at him fully. Reinstatement. Full operational status with autonomy. That was the real currency. Autonomy. Not rank, not medals. The ability to choose assignments, to say no, to say yes. To ensure no one else's extraction went unanswered because of politics. Her gaze drifted back to the ceiling. Anxious. Because power changes people. Even when they believe it won't. "What would you do?" she asked him quietly. Donovan considered the question longer than most officers would. "I'd stay," he said. "Not because they deserve you, but because the next operator who sees something wrong might need someone who won't ignore it." That settled somewhere deep. Not pride. Purpose. A soft knock interrupted them. The oversight official entered, the same man from the clearing. Suit jacket this time instead of windbreaker, congressional seal still pinned neatly. "Sergeant A. Trant," he said, "we have confirmation." She waited. "Your father flagged the compromised intel 48 hours before deployment. His request for extraction was rerouted." Rerouted. A polite word for buried. "Authorized by?" she asked. The official met her gaze steadily. "Hargrove." There it was. Not rumor. Not suspicion. Fact. Her throat tightened, not visibly, but internally. 17 years of unanswered questions compressing into a single syllable. Broken. That part of her might always remain broken. But broken things can still function. Sometimes they function better, because they know exactly where the weak points are. "The report will be amended," the official continued. "Your father's record will reflect that." Honor restored on paper. It didn't change the mountain. It didn't change the night he waited for extraction that never came. But it changed the story told about him. And stories matter. After they left, the room returned to quiet. Tessa closed her eyes. Not to sleep, to feel the absence of adrenaline. Hope crept in carefully. Not loud, not triumphant. Just steady. Weeks later, she stood outside the Pentagon in civilian clothes, arms still in therapy brace, scars healing clean. The sky above Virginia was overcast. Neutral. Reporters gathered at a distance, hungry for details they would never fully receive. Official statements were measured, language precise, words like procedural oversight and pending review. The world would never know the ridge, the laser glint, the moment before the shot. And that was fine. Some truths aren't for headlines. Inside, a small ceremony unfolded, not publicized, not broadcast. Her father's name was read aloud with corrected citation. She didn't cry. Pride is sometimes quieter than grief. Afterward, Donovan approached her one last time before she stepped outside. "You staying?" he asked. She adjusted the brace on her arm thoughtfully. "Yes." No hesitation now. "On one condition." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "I choose my teams." A small nod. "Done." They shook hands, not ceremonially, just firmly. Months later, in a different briefing room, a younger analyst stood at the edge of a table, voice uncertain, as she pointed out inconsistencies in a proposed mission plan. The room was filled with seasoned operators, some impatient, some skeptical. Tessa sat at the far end, listening. When the analyst finished, silence lingered. Tessa spoke calmly. "Walk me through it again." The analyst blinked, surprised. Encouraged. She did. And this time the room listened. Ignored. That cycle ended quietly in that moment. Not because of policy. Because of presence. Because someone who had once been dismissed chose not to dismiss another. Years later, operators would speak her call sign with something close to reverence. Not because she was the deadliest, but because she never let silence bury truth. And somewhere in a file room deep inside an institution that had once failed her family, a corrected record sat permanently archived. No fanfare. No applause. Just accuracy. On a clear morning not long after, she stood alone at a training range. Rifle braced. Breathing steady. Scar tissue pulling slightly when she extended her left arm. The target sat 900 meters out. Wind left to right. She exhaled slowly. Fire. Impact. She lowered the rifle without a smile. Dignity doesn't demand recognition. It doesn't need the room to freeze when a medic asks a name. It doesn't even need a code name spoken aloud. Sometimes dignity is a woman on a ridge who refuses to fall. Sometimes it's a report corrected 17 years too late. And sometimes it's the quiet decision to stay, so the next person isn't left waiting for extraction that never comes. Because in the end, strength isn't about how loud you are when you're right. It's about how steady you remain when you've been wounded. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.